Now, what are Section 504 and ADA? Well, as I indicated, they're federal laws. Let's step back just 1 second and talk about the importance of federal law and how that is binding. Under the United States Constitution, it says, essentially, federal law rules. The supreme law of the land is the United States Constitution. The Constitution says federal law supersedes any other law. It's called the Supremacy Clause. And so, when you have a federal law, that is going to supersede any state law or local law or school board policy that conflicts. So for example, like in the discipline context, it said, okay, you can only put a kid with a disability out for 10 days. You could not legally have a state law or a local policy to say, no, we're going to give you 15, or we're going to give you 20, because the federal law says 10. So that's an example. Now, you do have to comply with state law. You do have to comply with school board policy to the degree that it does not conflict with federal law. So you can't skirt ADA or 504 or IDEA or any other type of federal law. Say, for example, in another context, you say, well, you know what, I'm going to pay my state taxes, but I'm not going to pay my federal taxes. Well, the IRS is going to come looking for you. You say, well, I complied with state law. Well, that's fantastic. Louisiana Department of Revenue appreciates it. But the United States Treasury is going to want their cut too. And so you've got to comply with both state law and federal law. And so compliance with these particular laws is not negotiable. It has to happen. Otherwise, the district can face the consequences of not complying. Now, what do these laws do? These laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. Just generally prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in public programs, publicly funded programs. So any programs, services, or activities that the East Baton Rouge Public School System engages in, sponsors, that's what the anti-discrimination protections are going to, that's when they're going to come into play. 504 and ADA are separate federal statutes from the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, the anti-discrimination protections of 504 and ADA basically encompass all kids with disabilities under IDEA. So all of your 1508 kids, all of your SPED kids fall under the anti-discrimination protections of ADA and 504. And you say, well, why are they separate? Why are we talking about 504 and ADA? Because they're separate statutes. 504 came into being as part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So you've got a Republican president, Nixon, signed it into law in '73. Then you have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is really arguably broader in its detail, came out in 1990 and then was revised again in 2008, became effective in 2009, which we're going to talk about briefly later, how those amendments expanded the scope. Basically, for purposes of application, Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act are twins. Courts read them together, interpret them together. Basically, the provisions are largely identical and overlapping.